Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, good morning, happy Wednesday. Today, Wednesday, January 31st, the last day in January, Wednesday of the fourth week in Ordinary Time, Memorial of St. John Bosco, priest. St. John Bosco was the founder of Salesians, so it's very dear to people here in East Boston. But today I would like to talk about King David. For the past 3 weeks, basically, we've been, almost 3 weeks, we have been listening stories about David. The first readings have been taken from the second book of Samuel about King David. David is a central figure in the Bible, in the Old Testament. David is the prefiguration of Christ, but he's also a role model as a king. He is the king par excellence in the biblical tradition and in Jewish history. He is the model of a king. All kings should aspire to be like David. And so the Messiah for Jews would be a new King David, would be greater than David, definitely, but he will resemble David and take up the scepter, a crown that David held and wore to lead the people of Israel. For us, of course, the Messiah is Jesus, so he's the new king in the image of David. Of course, Jesus superseded David as a Messiah. Also replaced him, but so David is an essential figure in the Bible, and it's interesting to notice that David was not perfect. Was a great king, showed a great loyalty and fidelity to God, but was not perfect. It's still the image, the perfect image, or best image of a king, but David had his own flaws. He had one of his lieutenants killed because he wanted to marry the wife of this person, Uriah. And then David also feuded with one of his sons, Absalom, who turned against him. And David had to flee from Jerusalem because his son wanted to kill him. And he was trying to take the kingdom out of David's hands. But David showed this loyalty to God and his humble submission to the Lord, the one who had chosen him to be a king, by asking forgiveness after each of his mistakes, by acknowledging his mistakes, asking for forgiveness. And today, in the first reading, actually, we hear this interesting kind of puzzling story about David. So it poses a very important theological question. David, towards the end of his life, probably got a bit bored. He fought his whole life. At some point, he just wanted to know how many warriors he had, how strong his army was. And so he called Joab, his faithful general, and telling him to take a census of his soldiers. Joab said, you shouldn't do that. Why? Because it was clear throughout David's life, it was clear to David and his generals, that the source of strength for Israel, for David's army, was not in numbers, it was God. God was the one fighting alongside with the Israelites, David's army, and the victories were won with God's hand, with the help of God's hand, not because of their strength. And so Joab is kind of perplexed and puzzled. So if you're trying to determine how many soldiers you have, you're putting your confidence and strength in your army, the numbers, not in God. And so, but David goes ahead, and God gets mad at David for this reason, because David chose to rely on his strength, the strength on number, the strength, the physical strength, for human strength, over trusting God. God gets mad at David, and he offers David 3 options as a punishment. Either one option was 3 years of famine, 3 months, the other one was 3 months of war against his enemies, and fleeing from his enemies for 3 months, or 3 days of a plague would decimate his people. And David objects to God, saying, why are you making my people suffer? I should be the one to suffer. It's interesting, God does not punish David directly. Throughout his whole life, David is never punished directly. He's punished, his children are punished. Absalom, by the way, dies, but David is never punished directly. Why? Because the king is God, the one who represents God. It's God representative among his people. The king suffers because his people are suffering. David suffers through the suffering of his people. The king empathizes with his people, and so he takes on himself the suffering of his own people instead of suffering and be punished and suffering directly. This is what Jesus did. He took on himself our own suffering, our own punishment, and he suffered for us. So David is an image of Jesus. David foretells the story of David, and the fact that he had to suffer for his people foretells the suffering of Jesus, the suffering servant who took on himself our own punishment. Take care and God bless.